Pro Football Focus grades are in for LSU Arkansas. The player at the top of the list will be absolutely no surprise to anyone. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Want to recap some of what Brian Kelly said after the Arkansas game, including some very candid conversations about his team's SEC and college football playoff chances. This is the first time we've really heard Brian Kelly speak like this. That's coming up. Also, Brian Kelly did address the penalties. And one of the things that I often say is winning masks deficiencies. If you've listened to or watched any of my shows over the years, you've heard me say that ad nauseum, so much so that you're probably tired of hearing me say it. But the point remains, when you win, you focus on all the good and you tend to ignore the bad. But you have to address the bad, because if you don't, it could negatively impact you when you end up in another situation later down the road. So we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But we do this every week after LSU's games. Sift through Pro Football Focus numbers and tell you how the Tigers did. Now, it's important to remember that I always say when we talk about Pro Football Focus is not the metric. It's just a metric. It's one thing to consider when taking into account totality. And sometimes it either confirms or disconfirms, proves or disproves what we think about certain players or how things went. And when we look at LSU, of course, a day where the Tigers were fantastic running the football, a day where defensively you didn't allow 100 yards on the ground to Arkansas. Despite having Taylor Green, Jaquindon Jackson, you were so good at the point of attack, they became one-dimensional, especially as it got behind. You would anticipate some really good grades in that respect. And it should come as no surprise that that's kind of how it played out. When we look at the top 5 graded players, now I'm talking about starters, right? Or the contributors. I'm not talking about players that only played a handful of snaps. For example, Bo Bordelon on the offensive side had a great grade. 70.2. He was the 5th highest rated player, but he only played 11 snaps. He's kind of the tackle eligible. He did have a penalty against him, but his run blocking grade was an 82.3, which is fantastic. But I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the guys that were your starters, your key contributors, your main players. And at the top of the list, again, should come as no surprise that Whit Weeks was LSU's highest graded player on either side of the ball, 77.3. He is playing like an All-American. I've had some people ask, could Whit Weeks be an All-American? Over the next 5 games, if he continues to play like he has the last 2, then absolutely. Whit Weeks currently leads the SEC in tackles, 18 against Ole Miss, 9 against Arkansas, 27 tackles the last 2 weeks. Yeah, he's playing like it, and he's going to have big stages the next 2 times out. The Texas A&M game will be in prime time, 2 undefeated teams in the SEC, and then you better believe everyone's going to be watching that Alabama game. So those will be massive stages where everyone's going to watch. Everybody was watching the Ole Miss game, but nobody was watching Saturday against Arkansas. That was head up against Texas and Georgia. So the nation didn't see Whit Weeks have the game he did against Arkansas, but he will have his opportunity. He was fantastic in every way that you can be, and he has changed LSU's defense fundamentally. When Brian Kelly said about a month ago, we can no longer afford to platoon him. He's got to be on the field every play. He has been, and LSU's defense has been better for it. The top 5 overall players, either side of the ball, Whit Weeks 1, CJ Daniels 2, coming back to him in a second. Will Campbell, number 3, should come as no surprise. His pass blocking grade was magnificent, but his run blocking grade was actually even better in this football game. Will Campbell had an 80.0 run blocking grade. His pass block was 73.5. So when you look at the top 5, Weeks, CJ Daniels, Will Campbell, Sage Ryan, Braden Swinson, your top 5 players. Again, we talked about Whit Weeks. How about CJ Daniels? One of the things that I mentioned last week, if you were here, is how much they miss CJ Daniels. And while he's not flashy, CJ Daniels is a guy coming into this game that had 20 catches through 5 games, averaging 4 catches per game. He had the highest drop rate, meaning that sounds funny to say it that way, meaning he never drops the ball. He's the best at not dropping the football, if that makes sense. I don't want to say highest catch percentage, but because that's not exactly what it is, but as far as Pro Football Focus grades, and he is fundamentally the best blocker on the team. Told you the game against South Carolina, LSU played 79 snaps. CJ Daniels was on the field for 74 of them. The next highest receiver was Kyron Lacey at 61. In this game, he did get his bell rung late in the game, if you noticed that. But CJ Daniels was the highest graded offensive player, played 50 snaps of LSU's 81. And again, he came out late after he kind of got his bell rung. But he was fantastic again, a run blocking grade of 77.9. And he catches darn near everything. He was the most targeted receiver that LSU had on Saturday, and you can see his value. Even though it's not the flash, his value is in so many other things he does well on the field. We talked about Will Campbell. He got a couple of times by Landon Jackson, who's going to be a pro. But a big part of LSU's ability to run the ball on Saturday night was Will Campbell and the left side of that line, which they did an amazing job, because if you're just looking at the offensive grades, Daniels 1, Campbell 2, Garrett Dellinger 3, the third highest rated. By the way, Garrett Dellinger's pass blocking grade was 83.6. The only offensive lineman on the team with a better pass blocking grade was Miles Frazier at 88.1. So the left side of your line with Campbell and Dellinger were fantastic. And then Sage Ryan, Braden Swinson. So again, the top 5 weeks: Daniels, Campbell, Sage Ryan, Braden Swinson. Sage Ryan, this shouldn't come as any surprise, but Sage Ryan has been he's been an easy target for LSU fans over his career because he came in as a 5-star, and so the expectation is outsized. But the point that I have made so consistently about Sage Ryan his entire career, and now you're seeing it, is for his entire career, he was being a selfless player by playing out of position. He had a hamstring injury that cost him a lot of his freshman year. As a sophomore, he was playing mostly nickel and dime. Last year, out of necessity, because they were so bad, he was playing boundary corner. This year in the season opener against SC, when Zy Alexander wasn't back, they didn't want to start a true freshman in PJ Woodland, so they started Sage Ryan at boundary corner in that game, and since then he has played safety. And he continues to excel because Sage Ryan's natural position is safety. He is not a boundary corner. He's a guy that can be physical on the back end. He can be your last line of defense on the back end, but if you expect him to line up against an elite receiver, flip his hips and run with him, that's not his strength. It's amazing what happens when you get a player in their natural position. You've got that with Sage Ryan. And it stands to reason as well that Braden Swinson, even though we've come to expect from Braden Swinson these incredible pass rush numbers. The great thing about Swinson is in this ball game, in 41 snaps, his highest grade was actually his pass rush grade was very good. But his run defense was a 70.4 and his tackling grade was a 71.1. So it actually, forgive me, that was Savion. His run defense grade was a 65.1. His pass rush was a 71.5. So even though he didn't get home, you're talking about a guy that was having a big impact on the game with his pressures. He had 3 hurries. He had a tackle. He had an assisted tackle. He only missed 1 tackle in the game. Had a big stop as well. So Braden Swinson, even when he's not affecting the game with sacks, you can tell he's still impacting the ball game. Now, your bottom 5 is another part of this conversation that is also pretty revealing. And I want to get to that. We'll do it as we continue. Locked on LSU, your team every day. What a great time of year to be able to tell you about Z-Biotics. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel better tomorrow. Here's how you use it. Number one, you drink your pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step two, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, get a good night's sleep. Step three, enjoy tomorrow. You wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. So go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and to get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for 15% off. Wanted to get into the penalties from Saturday night in just a second, but we talked about the top 5 graded players for LSU. Let's look at the bottom 5. And again, this should probably be pretty revealing. Your lowest graded players were DJ Chester and Emory Jones. And that's become a bit of a theme. And it probably isn't a great surprise with DJ Chester because of the penalties. In the first half, I'm flipping through my notes, Chester had 2 false starts and an illegal snap. 3 of the 7 first half procedure penalties were on DJ Chester. Emory Jones had a holding penalty in the ball game as well, which certainly dinged him. The positive for Chester is that he had a 73.8 pass blocking grade. That was actually better than Will Campbell's grade. So the penalties certainly are a big part of why DJ Chester's number drops. But the other part of it as well is the run blocking grade, which was down at 51.8. So his pass blocking grade was very good. His run blocking grade was not. And the penalties dinged him even more, which is why he ended up at the bottom. But just ahead of him was Emory Jones. DJ Chester had a 45.6 grade. Emory Jones had a 52.0. Emory, 62.5 pass blocking. His run blocking grade was 52.0. And he did have the one penalty, the holding penalty, as we discussed. I think we know that Emory Jones is a really good player. But the big concern is a year ago, Emory Jones, his season grade from Pro Football Focus was a 73.9. So far this year, his season grade is a 56.9. So, look, he injured his ankle against UCLA. Maybe that's limiting him some. Maybe not. But it is fair to say that Emory Jones has struggled this year. I think we see that not only these Pro Football Focus grades, but your eyes see it as well. And even still, he and this offensive line have only allowed 2 sacks all season. So while the grades may not be great, in total, this offensive line still continues to play well. The other 3 lowest rated players were Greg Penn, Ashton Stamps, and Josh Williams. Greg Penn's run defense and his tackling grades are very good. The problem was his coverage grade. And I think we know that about Greg Penn. That's just not ever going to be his strength. He's not a guy that you want to turn and run in coverage. And if a team can scheme that against him, they'll probably win. But you're not asking Greg Penn more often than not to cover receivers and pass catchers. You're asking him to plug gaps and stop the run. Ashton Stamps was targeted 5 times. He gave up 4 catches. What that tells you is they are going away from Zy Alexander. And they're smart to do that because Zy Alexander is your best cornerback. And so they're looking for a liability, and they're looking over at Ashton Stamps' way. For what it's worth, Zy Alexander on the day graded out at 65.4 among starters. He was the 5th highest graded starter for LSU's defense. Stamps will be fine. And there was also, remember the play where Stamps and Gilbert had the miscommunication that gave up the only touchdown of the game. So that dinged him. But overall, You're talking about a defensive effort where LSU gave up less than 300 yards, less than 100 yards on the ground, and only allowed one touchdown. Overall, it was a good day. Now, the Josh Williams thing, his low grade was on carrying the football. But that's not what you're asking Josh Williams to be. His pass block grade was 77.4, which is what you want from Josh Williams. When he's in there, make sure you're an extra line of defense for Garrett Nussmeier. When they ask you to carry the ball, do a good job and get what you can. Josh Williams has been that his entire career, and there's no reason to think he won't continue to be that throughout the remainder of this season. So just a little peek into what Pro Football Focus thought about the LSU Tigers. Now, we did mention throughout 3 penalties on DJ Chester, the holding on Emory Jones. There was a false start on Aaron Anderson, a false start on Will Campbell. There were too many penalties for LSU. There were 7 procedure penalties in the first half alone of this ball game. And that's something that Brian Kelly was asked about after the game.
Yeah, we had 3 that were double clutches by our center. And sometimes that's on the quarterback, that he's taken a little bit too much time. You know, I think the ownership in that is the management of the entire offense. You know, we can easily say it was the crowd noise. Sometimes we have to get into a better rhythm, and that's getting the receivers lined up quicker. I mean, sometimes it's a fire drill out there. You know, Garrett is getting information, and so look, all of that together, we got to clean it up, because that stuff can't continue to happen. There were more penalties out there than I would like. We'll go back and you know, we'll look at it more closely, but it's not one person. It's the whole management of it has to get cleaner.
That is a very diplomatic answer from a guy who spent his early career in politics before he became a coach and defending his player. On the season, DJ Chester has 10 penalties. He had 2 against South Carolina. He had 2 against South Alabama. He had 3 against Arkansas. The only clean game he played without a penalty was UCLA. I'm willing to give DJ Chester, I don't want to say a total pass, but I am also understanding that this is a young player who is the only new starter on this offensive line. And if you were going to look at this line before the season and say, where's your weak link, you would have pointed at Chester. And it's not to say that he's not a good player or won't be a really good player. It's simply to say he's around a whole bunch of dudes with a ton of experience and 2 guys that are likely, or at least certainly Will Campbell is going to be a first-round pick, and possibly Emory Jones as well. So be patient with DJ Chester. I can understand Brian Kelly defending his player, but at the same time, flinching and everything associated with it. Look, Will Campbell had a false start in the game as well. I would argue Will Campbell, for the expectation we have for him, has been penalized too much this season. But the positive, if you're looking for it, is in the second half, you completely eliminated all of the procedure penalties. In the second half in total, you had a holding on Emory Jones. You had an offensive pass interference on Kyron Lacey in the second half. And then at the very end of the game, you had a false start on Ori Williams. So I say you eliminated the pre-snap. You did have a pre-snap, but it was on Ori Williams whenever the backups were in, running out the clock at the end of the game. So you did play mostly a clean second half, which was good. Now go replicate that when you're at Kyle Field, because as good of an environment as it was Saturday in Arkansas, it'll be 10 times that this coming Saturday at Kyle Field with over 100,000 people, and that place, which will be rocking because they're undefeated in the SEC, because it's a primetime game, because LSU's coming in, for all those reasons. And you are going to have to weather that storm. So let's hope that they can build off of it coming out of this weekend. Okay, it is Locked On LSU. After Further Review is the radio show I do every day. Well, sometimes those things are programmed in your brain. It's Locked On LSU. Let me knock out my final break. When we come back, Brian Kelly also made maybe as candid a comment as I've heard him say with respect to the SEC championship and this team's playoff chances. You'll hear that next. It's Locked On LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Hey, if you are thinking about heading to Kyle Field this weekend, heading to College Station to be in that number to help cheer on the Tigers, and you need tickets, Game Time can help. There's nothing like being there at a live event. If it's sports, if it's music, if it's theater, if it's comedy, whatever it is, Game Time can help you get there. Look, coming up this weekend, as a matter of fact, Friday, Saturday, Sunday down in New Orleans, there's a certain pop star who might just be putting on the most anticipated tour ever, going through a variety of eras. Maybe you want to be there in the Dome for any one of those three shows. Game Time can help get you there. Download the Game Time app, y'all. There's so many reasons I love it. I tell you about all the time. There's Game Time Picks, which is curation that makes it easier to save more on sports and concert and comedy and theater and everything. I love the all-in pricing, which I tell you about a lot. Had that experience before where you think you're paying a certain price. By the time you get to checkout, it ain't nothing like the price you thought you were going to pay. You turn on that feature when you toggle, it'll show you the total up front, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, and you can get the seat views as well. It's a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. It's all there on Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. As we wrap up today's episode, Brian Kelly, when he was meeting with reporters after the Arkansas win, was asked about the progress this team has made so far and where he thinks they might be going. The progress part was interesting, in part because of how he started it. And he started by talking about what they don't have and haven't had this year.
Yeah, they have not blinked. We lost Jacoby and Gilbert, one of our, arguably our most talented and experienced defensive tackle. Then, obviously Harold Perkins, right? And, we haven't had Chris, who's our, vertical threat all year. And it just seems these guys just keep, playing, through, and the next man stepping up. Nothing seems to faze this group, whether they're down 17-0 on the road, or, struggling to put together, a great drive. They just keep playing, and it's to their credit. Now they're playing cleaner, and I think that's a sign of a team that's really coming together.
I think it's also a sign of a veteran team. And when you look, it's a team that's seen it all. A lot of these guys were on the team at Florida 2 years ago where they were down early and they rallied back. A lot of these guys were on the team that they were trailing Auburn a couple of years ago, rallied back. A lot of these guys were on the team last year that was struggling at home in the first half against A&M, and then Jaden Daniels put on a Superman cape. Now, you don't have Jaden Daniels, but it's still that experience where guys, when you've been through it before and you've come out of negative situations, it helps you the next time you face it. And when you look at guys like Dellinger and Frazier that are both seniors that have been starting for 4 years, Campbell and Jones that have been starting for 3 years, Josh Williams was on the 2019 championship team. That's how long he's been around. Garrett Nussmeier, while he's only started now 7 career games, he's in his 4th year. And you look at guys like Savion Jones and Braden Swinson, and even Gio Paez just transferring in is still a 6th-year player. JVR Suggs. Whit Weeks is a young guy, but Greg Penn's wearing the 18. He's a senior now. Zy Alexander's in his 5th year of college football. You look at Major Burns, who's in his 5th year. You look at, a guy like Sage Ryan, who's a senior, and Jordan Gilbert, who's in his 4th year. It's a whole bunch of veteran players. They've been in all these environments. And so I'm not surprised that they're not blinking, as Brian Kelly said it, because they've seen all this before. And I think it's tremendously helpful and will continue to be as they move forward. But this was the point that Brian Kelly made that maybe got my attention the most. Brian Kelly was asked if the team is sort of looking differently at how they approach the remainder of the season because of what's on the table. And typically when coaches are asked these questions, you get a generic stock. The next game is the most important game because it's the next one, and none of it matters if you don't win the next one. Like, that's typically what you get. We're not focused on the big picture. We're not even thinking about that. All we're thinking about is A&M. I mean, you've heard it all a million times. That's what you normally get. That's not exactly what Brian Kelly said.
I think that that's pretty clear that this group kind of understands that now, especially, with one game on the road, and then we go on a bye week, and then 3 out of 4 at Tiger Stadium. So I think they can now sense that they have put themselves in a pretty good position. Now they got to go earn it again on the road, but there's clearly a different way that they perceive the next 6 weeks. And I think by their standards, they believe they're getting better, and I believe they're getting better each and every week. And this is a good time to get better later in the year.
Not often you'll hear a coach say that internally they know what they're playing for. It was interesting. Josh Williams was one of the players. Every Tuesday is when there's player availability for the media. And Josh Williams was one of the players that met with reporters. And Josh Williams didn't even know what time kickoff was against Arkansas. Think about that for a second. And that, by the way, that's not in any way a knock on Josh. It's just to say the things that you and I focus on so often are not the things the players are focusing on. They just know that they're going to show up and get on the bus whenever their itinerary says the coach says they need to get on the bus to go to the airport, and they're just going to follow whatever instructions they're given. But that's a 6-year player who on Tuesday night didn't even know what time kickoff was against Arkansas. So to think that they are thinking ahead far enough to know what possibilities are there for this team in the future tells you how real it is and how honest an answer that was from Brian Kelly. And the reality is, nobody wants to say it this way or think of it this way, but the truth is you bought yourself a game. Like, your only loss is a non-conference game. You have a game of wiggle room. You have 5 more. And you heard Brian Kelly say it. You got a big one against A&M, but after that, you get an open date, then you got 4 games left. 3 of the 4 are at home. Your one road game is at Florida, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that's easy, especially after you play Bama. But I think LSU is a great matchup against Bama because Bama's secondary cannot stop the pass. And if you limit Jalen Milroe's ability to run and make him a passer, he is not a good passer. He just set a career high for incompletions. He missed, by Pro Football Focus, missed 10 open receivers. Like, he's not a good passer. You should win that game in Tiger Stadium. Can you go on the road and beat Florida? You just handled a great spot. That was a true letdown spot this weekend. And then you're home against Vanderbilt, home against Oklahoma, who just fired their offensive coordinator because they're 127th in the country in offense. So the hardest game you have remaining, if you're just ranking them, is this Saturday at Kyle Field. And even if you drop it, you're going to be favored in every game the rest of the way. And if you win them and go 10-2, 7-1 in the SEC, you should be in the college football playoff. I mean, it's easy for me to say sitting here at my house doing the show. It's fun for you and I to think about it. But according to the head coach, it's pretty clear. The players understand that's a reality too. And hopefully it causes all them to lock in and prepare this week for A&M. Because, man, if you get past this game, if you go to Kyle Field and win, your odds of making the college football playoff increase exponentially because you have an open date, 4 games, 3 of them at home, and you basically have to go 3-1 in those 4 to get in the playoff. What a time to be alive, y'all. We have come a long way from September 1st in Las Vegas with that disappointing finish against the USC Trojans. but there's still a long way to go with 6 more weeks, and we're going to be here for all of it. Hey, thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. If you're listening on podcast, please subscribe, rate us, leave a review. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.